Scripture passage today comes from the Gospel according to Matthew. And we have been looking at these last days of Jesus as we enter into the season of Lent, this last week that he was here on earth, and the very last lessons that he got to give to his disciples, which kind of ended up becoming kind of a crash course in discipleship. But these are the ones the things he wanted to make sure they knew and heard and saw in him before he left them. So before we read this, though, let's pause for a moment in prayer. Good and gracious Father, we thank you that you have given us your holy word, Lord, that we might take in what you have given to us, Lord, that it might enter into us, Lord, and become a part of who we are. And I pray, Lord, by this word, Lord, that and by the Spirit, that you would prepare in us hearts and minds that we may receive this fully and completely, Lord, and completely learn and understand what it is your will is for us today. And so, Lord, I pray that you would bless this holy reading of your holy word. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. This is the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 22, verses 34 to 40. Listen now to the word of the Lord. But when the Pharisees had heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. If you ever want to win an argument, I've got a great tactic for you. Now, I don't know if you'll necessarily win it, but you'll end it, okay? You might not make many friends, but you'll score some major points in your argument. It'll make you feel really good about yourself, too, at least for a little while. So the tactic I'm talking about is called the trap question. The trap question. A great weapon to wield in any argument. Now, you might know what the trap question is, and you've definitely heard it before. A trap question is a question that is designed, the way it's worded, that no matter how you answer it, you're going to look bad. It's a trap. You've probably seen it a lot when they do congressional hearings. They love to throw out their trap questions. They're not looking for information. They're not looking for understanding. They're not looking for illumination on the point. They just want to score points. They want to make somebody else look bad. Reporters, they love using trap questions for politicians that they don't like. I mean, anybody who you want to trap, make them look bad, trap question. I'll give you an example, okay? This is an extreme example, but it'll illustrate the point well. So, Senator, do you support killing children? Do you? Yes or no? Do you support killing children? And of course, I'll say, no, I don't support that. Then how can you support this bill, Senator, where millions of children might die if you vote yes on this bill? Does that mean you support killing children? You've seen types like that. They happen all the time, these trap questions. They're really hard to get out of just because of the way that they're phrased. Christians, we get a lot of trap questions. If you talk to unbelievers and you talk to people who really don't like our faith, you'll get trap questions thrown at you all the time. And they're really hard to answer. One we get a lot, one I've heard a lot and been directed at me, is a question that goes like this. Is God's law eternal and unchanging, or does it change from age to age? Is God's law perfect, unchanging, and always the same, or does it change from age to age? Now, if you answer in one way and say, well, God's law does change, because we've seen a change from the Old Testament to the New. If you answer in that way, they'll get you, because they'll say, well, God must not have been so wise and omnipotent is he if he had to change his law? Because why did he make the law perfect to begin with? Now, if you decide to go and say, yes, God's law is perfect and is unchanging, it's never changed, then they'll get you with this. Then why are there so many unethical things in the Bible? Like slavery. Does God support slavery? Does your God believe in making slaves of other human beings? You see what I mean? So it's a trap question. And it's not meant to illuminate. It's not meant to try to truly understand our faith. It's meant to trap us, to make us look bad, and to make our faith look bad. It's the nature of the question. It's, like I said, you'll win some arguments, but you're not going to win many friends that way. But the trap question, by its design, is very tough to get out of. In fact, the only one that I knew was really good at getting out of trap questions was Jesus. I mean, no surprise. I mean, and he was a master at getting out of the trap question. Time and time again, his enemies and the Pharisees and the lawyers, they threw these questions at him. And time again, not only did Jesus get out of the question and answer it right, but he made them look like idiots in the process. And even better for us, what was neat for us, when we look back and we read how he answered these trap questions, he actually illuminates the law. Always better for us when he answers those questions. He comes across and faces these really difficult questions, and at the end of it, we always understand the law and the will of God a little bit better by how Jesus answered those trap questions. And he always, I love to read about him. That's one of the times that I wish I could have been there and to watch him answer those questions and really just see the look on the people's faces when he got out of them. Because again, like I said, not only did he get out of them, but he taught us more about the law at the same time. Perfect example is the tax question. The Pharisees thought they were going to catch him in the tax question. And they said, is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar? And that was a trap, because if he said, yes, pay taxes to Caesar, that meant that most of the Jewish people are like, well, he supports Rome. And if he says, no, don't pay taxes to Caesar, then they would have gone and told the Roman officials, hey, this guy over here is starting a rebellion, telling people not to pay their taxes. But Jesus answered in just a brilliant way, the only way he could get out of it. He said, render unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, and render unto God that which belongs to God. And through that, we have a deeper understanding of our commitment to God. He was showing us that our civic responsibilities and religious responsibilities are separate, and they should not conflict if we're holding our religious responsibilities and following them truly and faithfully. So out of that trap question, we get a greater understanding of the law of God and the will of God. And today, he comes across another trap question. And getting out of that trap, he reveals to us the heart and the soul of God's law. That it's love. And not only is love the greatest commandment, this love, Jesus tells us, contains every and all command that God has ever given us. It's contained in this one supreme command. And as Jesus says it, all the law and all the prophets hang upon this one command. So it begins with a trap question. And we know it's a trap question because the Bible tells us it's a trap question. Verse 35 there, right at the beginning of our passage, it says a lawyer came to ask, and as soon as we say lawyer, we know something's wrong, right? I mean, that's already got to watch out when lawyers are asking you questions. But he says they asked him a question in order to test him. He wasn't looking for information. He wasn't wanting to learn. He wanted to test Jesus, not in a good way, in the bad way. He wanted to trap him. And so he asked him a question. He says, Rabbi, tell us, which is the greatest command? In all the Bible, which is the greatest command? Now, it may sound innocent to us. He's just asking a question about which is the greatest command, but it's actually a trap. Because you see, in the rabbinical tradition, which is the tradition of the rabbis, back then in the days of Jesus, all the rabbis believed that every law of God was equal. Every law was equally important. Now, that doesn't matter. They still love to argue about which was the greatest law. But every time you try to put forward one law as being greater, all the other rabbis, they would tear you apart. So it was this trap question, right? And the trap kind of goes like this. If Jesus would have said the way that they believed and said, all right, there is no greatest law. All the laws are equally important, which is he could have answered it like that. But if he'd have said that, all the other the Pharisees and leaders would have said, well, you can't answer the question, can you? It's a very simple question. What kind of rabbi are you if you can't answer this very fundamental question, which is the greatest law? Why should we believe anything you say if you can't answer this one little question? Now, on the other hand, if Jesus had decided to point out one of the particular laws, they all would have jumped over him and been outraged that he didn't show respect to the other laws. Right? If Jesus would have said, hey, all right, the greatest law is you shall have no other gods before me, then the rabbis would be like, oh, you don't care about murder then, do you? What about murder? Is not murder bad? You want us to go out and murder people? What kind of teacher are you that teaches that murder isn't bad? And conversely, if he would have said, oh yeah, the greatest commandment is you shalt not murder. Well, what about our duty to God? You don't care about that? What kind of teacher doesn't put having only one God as first and foremost of all the commandments? What kind of teacher are you? You see, no matter how he would have answered the question, they were ready with the response to try to discredit Jesus. It was a no-win situation. It was a trap, and a cleverly laid trap, I might say. Or so they thought. Jesus outmaneuvers this question just as he outmaneuvers every critique and question that the Pharisees ever laid at his feet. He answered him like this: you shall love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On this hangs all the law and all the prophets. Now, some people will read this and they'll wrongly believe that Jesus was giving a new law here. But in fact, he was not. This was not a new law. He was answering out of the old law itself. Everything Jesus quoted here today comes from the Old Testament. All the way back in what they call the books of the law. And those are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Those first 5 books, they call it the Torah or they call it the Pentateuch. And that makes up the books of the law. And that part about loving the Lord, that came from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. And that part about loving your neighbor as yourself, that was lifted directly from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. All of this is part of the original law that God gave the Hebrew people. But what the brilliance, though, of this law is that, or the answer that Jesus gave, is that when he answered it, all at one time he answered which is the greatest command, and at the same time he showed complete respect and honor to every other command that God gave. And he was able to do what all the other teachers and Pharisees and lawyers thought was not possible. Show what is the greatest command while at the same time respecting every other law and every other command that God gave. Because notice, he didn't say this law is better than all the others. This one command that God gives you, love the Lord and love your neighbor, this is better than all the other commands. He says, no, this is the law that contains all the other commands. This is the law upon which depends, which is what our translation today, it says, all the law and prophets depend upon this law. Now that word that the translation today, which is the English Standard Version, it says it depends upon all the law and prophets. The word in there, it actually in Greek, is a word called krematai. And it's not actually depends. The word literally means hangs. And you think of like a basket hanging. And he says, upon this law, love the Lord and love your neighbor, upon this hangs all the law and prophets. So kind of think of a basket, and the basket itself is love the Lord and love your neighbor, and inside that basket is held every other law that God has given his people. Every other law, every other command is wrapped up in this one command. You see, it's not a new command that He's given. This is a command that has always been with God's people. And at the same time, it is every command that God has given His people. And that means you can look at the Old Testament law or any commandment that God has given. Go look through it. And to every single one you can put under the category of loving the Lord with all your heart or loving your neighbor. Every single law is an expression of either this, of either loving God or loving your neighbor. I mean, take the first of the 10 commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. That is a great way that we show love to God. Is not having any other God besides the one God. Not respecting, not honoring, not following any God, not acknowledging any God but the one God. That is a classic and perfect way to show and live our love for God, not having any other gods before Him. And in the same way, commandment, thou shalt not murder. That is a great way to show love to your neighbor, is to not murder him. Your neighbor will be very, very appreciative when you don't murder him. You're not only loving him, you're loving him just as you love yourself, as none of you also want to be murdered. Even when we get into like the strange dietary codes, this is also a way that the ancient people then showed love to God. What God desired for them was to be a people that were set apart, that were distinct from all the nations around them. So He gave them different laws about diet, different laws about dress, different laws about having their hair, different laws about behavior. And those laws were designed that they would remember that they are a distinct and separate people. They're not like all the other nations. So by following those laws, they were showing love and honor to God. And in the same way, you can find every single one, every single command in the Bible will fit in either the category of loving God or loving your neighbor as yourself. So some of you may ask, if this was such an important law and this is what all the law and prophets was about, then why didn't He just give us these two and be done with it? Why fill out all these 5 books of the Torah with regulation after regulation, after law, command after command, when all He really wanted to tell us was love God and love your neighbor? So why didn't He just declare that? Have just 2 tablets. So one said love God, other said love your neighbor. Here you go, folks. This is what you got. He could have done that. But I think we would have known what would have happened if that's all He did. If that's all He did was say, all right, folks, I got 2 commands for you. I want you to love me, and I want you to love your neighbor. You got it? Everyone there would have been like, okay, sure. I mean, that's easy. I am, after all, a very loving person. I mean, no doubt I love God, and as far as the rest of you go, I love everybody. I am an expert at love, by the way. That's what we all think, don't we? We all think we're experts at love. No one thinks like, I'm good at everything else but love. I'm not good at that. I've got no love in me at all. I mean, really nothing. There's nothing there. Nobody thinks that. No one believes that. If God only gave us these 2 commands and said just love, we thought we have it already. We got no problem. We got nothing else that we need to do. But then God gives us this, what we call the rest of the law. All these regulations, all these different commands, all these rules for how we're supposed to behave towards God and how we're supposed to behave towards our fellow man. And what He's showing us in that is that you're not quite as good at loving as you think. I mean, read through those commands. They're a lot, and they're hard to keep. And if all these are ways that we either love God or love our neighbor, we have to come to the conclusion that maybe we are not as good at loving as we think we are. I mean, truly all we need to know is just to be in a relationship with a person. It doesn't even have to be a romantic relationship, any relationship. If you're being honest with yourself, it shows us we're not near as good at loving as we think we are. I mean, I screw up my relationships all the time. And it's only because my wife loves me that we're still married. It's not because I'm great at loving. I'm actually mess it up all the time. And God's law, if it does nothing else, shows us how hard it is to follow His law. And if His law is contained in love God and love your neighbor, well, it means we don't love near as well as we think we do. And then when Jesus gets into explaining what love is about and what the law is about, it really makes us look bad. Because we read in the Sermon on the Mount there at the beginning of Matthew, when He explains the true depth and the nature of the law, He's really exposing how terrible we are at loving. Because He shows us not just outward obedience, it's what's in your heart as well. He says, yeah, okay, you don't murder, that's great, but did you know that if you hate in your heart, you've already committed murder? Well, that's kind of tough. We've all hated in our heart. And He shows us that murder is just as much about what is in your heart as the actions of killing another human being. And He says, you think you haven't committed adultery? You know what? If you lust, even look at a woman with lust in your heart, you have already committed adultery. Now just ask Jimmy Carter how hard that is. Like, I can't even have lust in my heart. It shows us how difficult this law really is, that it's about as much as what is in your heart as it is the physical act of unfaithfulness. Because the law is not about just what we do with our bodies, the things that we say with our mouth. It's about what's in our hearts as well. And loving God and loving your neighbor. Just as much what is in your heart as the things that you do. This is what God has been getting at the whole time. That's what He's been teaching us from the very beginning. That's what He expects of us from the very beginning, to love Him with our whole heart, our whole mind, and whole soul, and to love our neighbor as ourself, not just in actions, in our feelings, and in our thoughts. He doesn't care if it's just for show. He's not looking for the show. He wants it to be for real. Not just a part of us. He wants all of us. Every single bit of who and what we are. All of the law, all of the prophets hang on this one law. Love God and love your neighbor. So when we understand this, we not only understand the command of God better, we also happen to find our way out of our own trap question. You know, the one I presented to you at the beginning, the one that people love to throw at the feet of Christians. Does the law of God change, or is it eternally the same? We understand the law that He has given us. We understand the answer to that question is yes. Yes to both counts. We can say yes, the law of God is eternal and it never changes. Because we've only had one real law from the very beginning. We've only had one command from the very beginning. Love God and love your neighbor. That law has never changed. It has never been altered. It is as true today as it was when He first commanded the Israelites to do it. It was as true then as it was when Jesus spoke it. It is true when Jesus spoke it as it is for us. And this law is going to be true 100 years from now, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years can go on. And this law is going to be unchanging and unaltered and untrue and ever the one command of our life. Yes, the law of God never changes. But yes, we will hear different commands from time to time. We have seen a change in the law because we are learning how to love God better. Our understanding of what it means to love God and to love our neighbor has changed quite a bit from the day when God first gave that command. And the whole history of the church, the whole history of this church, the whole history of our faith is Christians learning to do that just a little bit better. We look back at the mistakes of our past, moments that the church is embarrassed of, moments when the church did some very unchristian things. But ultimately, this is the story of us trying to learn this command better. This is the story of us trying to understand really what it means to love God and to love our neighbor. And yes, this has changed. But even in our mistakes, we're learning to do this just a little bit better. And this is the reason why no matter what the past, any church after said about slavery at all, no matter what was even sometimes preached from pulpits, it was in Christian nations that slavery was first outlawed. And this was inevitable that it would happen because slavery was something that never sat right with the Christian conscience. Even as it was just a part of the culture around us, there was always a conflict in the Christian mind and the Christian heart with enslaving another human being. Because we could never admit to ourselves that this was a good way to love our neighbor as ourselves. Because nobody in the world wants to be in chains. So why will we do it to another human being? See, this was the church learning what it means to love God and to love our neighbor. And this is why human rights are a Christian invention, and this is why the advance of human rights has been and always will be a Christian cause. Because ultimately this is us trying to learn to love God and to love our neighbor just a little bit better. And this is our quest as individual Christians as well. This is what we should all strive to learn. I look back at my own past and it's littered with mistakes. Littered with ways that I was terrible at loving people. Ways that I completely failed at loving God. Things I'm completely ashamed of. But my journey as a Christian is to understand how I can live this law just a little bit better every day. Your job as a Christian, your quest as a child of God is to learn and understand how to love people better and love God better. And we all have a lot still to learn. Least of all, we need to learn that no one can fulfill this law perfectly. Most of all, we understand that this is what God desires of us more than anything else. And this is what He has always sought for us to learn. And what we need to strive to learn as long as we sit on this side of paradise. And this even needs to be the main subject of your prayers from time to time. Where we even ask God, say, Lord, teach me how to love. Lord, help me. Teach me how to love a little bit better. Teach me how to love like you do. And so fulfill the one command you have on my life. So yes, there are some changes to how we have understood the law of God. Some of the details, some of the particulars have changed. But the heart of the law has never been altered. It is the same today as always. As true today as it ever has been. Love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Here you will find all the law, all the prophets, and the perfect will of your God. To Him be all the glory forever and ever. Amen.